The distress signal reached Commander Sarachin at 0400 hours, yanking her from a fitful sleep aboard the human vessel Defiant Hope. The message crackled through the ship's communications array with desperate urgency, fragmenting as it struggled across the vast emptiness of space. It came from the Valerian colony on Theta 7, a settlement of peaceful traders who had been humanity's allies for nearly a decade. Sarah's dark eyes snapped open as the artificial intelligence filtered the transmission through her quarters, and what she heard made her blood run cold. The Valorians weren't just under attack. They were being systematically annihilated by something they kept calling the Dreadnought, their clicks and whistles translated by the ship's systems into words thick with terror. Sarah threw off her covers and was dressed in her uniform within 90 seconds, her shoulder-length black hair hastily tied back as she sprinted toward the bridge. The Defiant Hope wasn't a military vessel by traditional standards. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 15 years ago, and their technology still lagged behind most established civilizations by centuries. The ship was a retrofitted cargo hauler that had been modified with whatever weapons and shields the United Earth defense could scrape together from their limited resources and borrowed alien technology. Sarah had commanded her for 3 years, running escort missions and patrol routes along the frontier territories where human interests intersected with dozens of alien species. Her crew of 47 was a mix of eager young officers fresh from the academy and grizzled veterans who remembered Earth before first contact. They were good people, brave and resourceful, but they were vastly outmatched by almost every military force in the known galaxy. That had never stopped them before, and Sarah wasn't about to let it stop them now. When she reached the bridge, her first officer was already there. Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood at the tactical station, his tall frame hunched over the displays as streams of data cascaded across the screens. He looked up as Sarah entered, his weathered face grim beneath short gray hair. Marcus had served in the old Earth naval forces before the arrival of the aliens, and he carried himself with the steady competence of someone who had seen genuine combat. "Commander, we've got a situation," he said, his deep voice cutting through the ambient hum of the ship's systems. "The Valerian colony is under attack by a Kreth warship. Based on the energy signatures, it's the unyielding Sovereign." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Every species in this sector of space knew about the unyielding Sovereign. The Kreth Dominion had built it as a demonstration of their technological supremacy, a massive dreadnought that had never lost a battle in its 12-year operational history. The ship was 3 kilometers long, bristling with particle beam weapons, antimatter torpedoes, and shield generators powerful enough to withstand sustained bombardment from an entire fleet. The Kreth had used it to subjugate 17 different civilizations, forcing them into tributary relationships where they paid massive amounts of resources for the privilege of not being obliterated. The ship's commander, War Leader Thaxon, was infamous throughout the galaxy as a brilliant but ruthless tactician who gave no quarter and accepted no surrender unless it came with complete capitulation. The unyielding Sovereign had earned its name through blood and fire, and the mere mention of it was enough to make most spacefaring species abandon entire star systems rather than face it. "What are they doing at Theta 7? Sarah asked, moving to her command chair and bringing up the tactical display on the main view screen. The holographic representation showed their current position, approximately 6 light hours from the Valerian colony. The Valorians have nothing worth taking. They're artists and traders, not a military threat." Marcus pulled up another screen, showing decoded communications intercepts. "Best we can tell, Thaxon is making an example of them. 3 weeks ago, the Valerian Senate publicly condemned the Kreth Dominion's expansion policies at the Galactic Council. It was mostly symbolic. Everyone knows the Council has no real enforcement power, but Thaxon apparently decided that even symbolic defiance needed to be crushed." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Commander, he's not just attacking military targets. He's glassing the entire colony from orbit. Current estimates suggest the Valerian population of 40,000 will be extinct within the next 2 hours." The bridge fell silent except for the soft beeping of various instruments. Sarah's crew turned to look at her, waiting for orders. She could see the question in their eyes, the same question that was racing through her own mind. What could one outdated human ship possibly do against the most feared warship in the sector? The Defiant Hope carried railguns and missile pods that would barely scratch the dreadnought's shields. Their own defensive barriers would collapse under a single salvo from the Kreth vessel. By every logical calculation, jumping to Theta 7 would be suicide. It would be throwing away 47 human lives for no tactical gain, no strategic advantage, and no realistic hope of success. Sarah thought of the Valorians she had met during trade negotiations, gentle beings who communicated through musical tones and whose art galleries were renowned across a dozen systems. She thought of the children in those colonies, young ones who had never held a weapon or harbored a violent thought in their lives. She thought of the message humanity had tried to send when they joined the galactic community, that Earth would stand with the peaceful, the vulnerable, and the oppressed. And she thought of the words her father had told her before she left Earth for the last time, when she had accepted this command. He had been a Marine, killed in action during humanity's brief border skirmish with the Zelthri pirates, and he had always said that being outgunned was just another tactical problem waiting for a creative solution. "Helm, set a jump course for Theta 7, Sarah ordered, her voice steady and clear. "Maximum speed. I want us there in 30 minutes. Marcus straightened, surprise flickering across his face before being replaced by grim determination. "Commander, the Sovereign will cut us apart." "Probably," Sarah acknowledged, allowing herself a tight smile. "But we're going anyway. Send a priority transmission to Earth Defense Command, let them know what we're doing." "And Marcus?" She met his eyes. "Start thinking. We need every trick, every exploit, and every dirty tactic we can come up with. We can't beat that ship in a straight fight, so we're going to have to be smarter than they are." The crew erupted into controlled chaos as the ship prepared for combat and faster-than-light jump. Sarah watched them work, feeling a fierce pride in these humans who had volunteered to serve on the frontier despite knowing how outmatched they were. At the engineering station, young Ensign David Park furiously calculated power distribution patterns, trying to squeeze every possible erg of energy from their reactor. At communications, Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka was broadcasting warnings on all frequencies, alerting nearby vessels to stay clear of Theta 7. And at the weapons console, Specialist Rachel Goldman was programming their limited arsenal of missiles with updated targeting algorithms, her fingers flying across the controls. As the ship's faster-than-light drive spun up, Sarah noticed someone else entering the bridge. Dr. Elise Novak, the ship's chief scientist and xenotechnology specialist, hurried to Sarah's side. Elise was technically a civilian advisor, not part of the military command structure, but she had been with the Defiant Hope since its first mission. She was brilliant, with doctorates in both quantum physics and xenobiology, and she had a knack for understanding alien technology that had saved the ship more than once. She was also beautiful in a way that made Sarah's heart beat faster whenever they were in close proximity, tall and graceful, with strawberry blonde hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail and green eyes that seemed to see right through any problem to its solution. They had been dancing around their attraction to each other for over a year, both of them too professional to acknowledge it openly, but Sarah was acutely aware of Elise's presence whenever they shared a space. "I heard we're going up against the unyielding Sovereign," Elise said, clutching a data pad to her chest. "Please tell me you have a plan." "Working on it," Sarah replied, studying the tactical readouts. "What do we know about Kreth military doctrine? What are their weaknesses?" Elise moved closer, activating a holographic display between them. The image showed the massive Kreth dreadnought in detail, its hull covered in overlapping armor plates and weapon emplacements. "The Kreth are extremely hierarchical and rigid in their thinking," she explained, her fingers manipulating the display to highlight various systems. "Their tactics are based on overwhelming force and established patterns. They've never needed to innovate because their ships are simply more powerful than anything they face. The Sovereign has defeated every opponent by parking in orbit and systematically destroying targets until the enemy surrenders or dies. So they're predictable," Marcus observed, joining the conversation. "They won't expect unconventional tactics. They won't even recognize them as tactics, Elise confirmed. But that doesn't solve our fundamental problem. Their shields can withstand anything we throw at them, and their weapons will penetrate our defenses immediately. We need to find a way to either bypass their shields or prevent them from firing. She looked at Sarah, concern evident in her eyes. Sarah, I'm not sure this is survivable. Sarah felt the weight of that statement, the unspoken fear beneath it. She and Elise had shared countless late-night conversations in the ship's observation deck, talking about everything from quantum mechanics to their childhoods on Earth. There had been moments when Sarah had almost reached for Elise's hand, almost closed the distance between them, but duty had always held her back. Looking at Elise now, Sarah realized with sudden clarity that she didn't want to die without Elise knowing how she felt. But that revelation would have to wait. Right now, 40,000 Valorians were counting on them, whether they knew it or not. Then we'll make sure we survive, Sarah said firmly. She turned back to the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. The Defiant Hope shuddered slightly as it entered faster-than-light transit, the stars on the view screen stretching into rainbow streaks. They had 28 minutes before they arrived at Theta 7. 28 minutes to devise a strategy that could somehow neutralize the most powerful warship in the sector. Marcus was pacing now, his tactical mind clearly working through scenarios. Their shields are designed to stop energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, he mused. But shields need frequency modulation to maintain integrity. If we could somehow determine their exact frequency, we'd need at least an hour of sustained sensor contact to map their shield harmonics, Elise interrupted. We don't have that kind of time, and they'd destroy us long before we got useful data. David Parks spoke up from engineering, his young voice nervous but excited. What if we don't try to break through their shields? What if we go around them? Sarah turned to him. Explain. The young ensign brought up a new schematic. Shields project outward from the hull, right? They're designed to intercept incoming threats. But they also have to allow the ship's own weapons to fire out, which means there are momentary gaps in the shield matrix whenever they shoot. If we could time our attack to coincide with their weapons discharge. The gaps last for microseconds, Elise said, but Sarah could see the interest sparking in her eyes. We'd need perfect timing and incredible precision. We're humans, Sarah said with a slight grin. Crazy precision is kind of our thing. It's how we got to space with technology that every other species considered primitive. She stood from her command chair, energy flowing through her. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to provoke the Sovereign into engaging us. We'll make ourselves such an annoying target that Vaxxon can't ignore us. While we're doing that, we analyze the exact timing of their weapons cycle. Then we thread a missile through one of those gaps. One missile won't be enough to damage a ship that size, Marcus objected. Even if we get through their shields, their armor. We don't need to destroy them, Sarah cut in, her plan crystallizing. We need to disable them. Elise, their reactor, where's it located? Elise manipulated the hologram, highlighting a section deep within the dreadnought's core. Here, but it's buried under hundreds of meters of armor and secondary shielding. Even a direct hit wouldn't, she stopped, understanding dawning. Unless we use a phased plasma warhead. If we detonate it at the right frequency, it could induce a resonance cascade in their reactor containment. Would that destroy them? Sarah asked. No, but it would force an emergency shutdown, Elise replied, excitement growing in her voice. They'd lose main power for at least 30 minutes while they purge the reactor and restart it. No power means no shields, no weapons, no engines. Marcus was nodding slowly. 30 minutes is enough time to evacuate a significant portion of the Valorian population. We could coordinate with their transport ships, set up an emergency extraction. It's still incredibly risky, Elise cautioned, though Sarah could see she was warming to the plan. We're talking about microsecond timing, perfect frequency calibration, and a delivery system accurate to within centimeters at combat range. The margin for error is essentially zero. Sarah met her eyes. Can you calibrate the warhead? If I have the shield frequency data and enough time, yes, Elise confirmed. But Sarah, if this doesn't work. If it doesn't work, we die trying to save 40,000 innocent people, Sarah finished. I can live with that. Can you? Elise held her gaze for a long moment, and Sarah saw something shift in those green eyes, a mixture of fear, determination, and something else, something that made Sarah's breath catch. I can live with that, Elise said softly. But I'd prefer we all survive. I have things I'd like to say to you. After. The bridge crew suddenly became very interested in their stations, though Sarah noticed several poorly concealed smiles. Marcus coughed diplomatically. We're approaching Theta 7, he announced. 2 minutes to normal space. Sarah forced herself to break eye contact with Elise, though her heart was racing with more than pre-battle adrenaline. All hands, battle stations, she ordered, her voice carrying throughout the ship. This is Commander Chen. In approximately 90 seconds, we're going to exit faster than light travel in the middle of an active war zone. We will be facing an enemy that has never been defeated, aboard a ship that by all rights shouldn't even be in this fight. But I've served with each and every one of you, and I know what humans are capable of when we're defending those who can't defend themselves. We're going to save those Valorians, and we're going to show the Kreth Dominion that Earth doesn't abandon its friends. Man your stations, trust your training, and remember, we're not here to fight fair. We're here to win. The crew responded with crisp efficiency, their earlier nervousness replaced by focused determination. Sarah strapped herself into her command chair as the ship's countdown reached its final seconds. The view screen showed the swirling chaos of faster-than-light travel, and then suddenly they were back in normal space, and Theta 7 hung before them like a jewel, a beautiful blue and green world that was currently burning. The tactical display immediately lit up with threat indicators. The unyielding Sovereign dominated the scene, a massive wedge-shaped monstrosity that dwarfed everything around it. The dreadnought was in low orbit, its weapons firing continuous streams of superheated plasma at the surface below. Sarah could see the scars on the planet's face, entire continents turned to glass and ash. Smaller Valorian ships flitted desperately around the combat zone, trying to evacuate civilians, but many were being shot down as they attempted to flee. Sensors are reading massive energy signatures, David reported, his voice tight. The Sovereign is operating at approximately 60% combat capacity. They're not even using their full arsenal. Picking up Valorian distress calls on all frequencies, Yuki added. They're begging for assistance from anyone in range. Sarah's hands clenched on her armrests. Well, they've got us. Helm, take us in on attack vector Alpha 7. Put us directly between that dreadnought and the planet. Marcus, charge all weapons. Make us impossible to ignore. As the Defiant Hope accelerated toward the massive Kreth warship, Sarah saw their sensor suite begin collecting data on the enemy's shield frequencies and weapons timing. Elise had moved to a science station, her fingers dancing across the controls as she analyzed the incoming information. The dreadnought seemed to notice their approach, and Sarah watched as massive weapons batteries began to track their position. They're targeting us, Marcus announced unnecessarily. Multiple weapons lock. Good, Sarah replied, surprising her crew. That means they're not targeting Valorian evacuation ships. Evasive pattern Delta, keep us moving but stay in their sensor focus. We need them to shoot at us. The next few seconds seemed to stretch into eternity. Sarah watched the tactical display as the unyielding Sovereign fired, massive bolts of energy screaming across the void toward her ship. The helmsman threw the Defiant Hope into a violent corkscrew maneuver, and Sarah felt the artificial gravity struggle to compensate. One shot missed by barely 200 meters, close enough that their shields flared with proximity feedback. Another grazed their portside hull, and warning klaxons blare as armor plating vaporized. Shields at 70%, David called out. Hull breach on deck 3, emergency bulkheads holding. Keep us alive, Sarah ordered. Elise, how's that data looking? Getting it, Elise replied, her voice strained with concentration. I can see the pattern in their weapons cycle. They fire in volleys of 6, with a .03 second gap between each shot for shield recalibration. If we time it perfectly, yes. I have their shield frequency. Calibrating the warhead now. The ship rocked again as another near-miss sent electromagnetic feedback through their systems. Sarah gripped her armrests, watching her crew work with desperate precision. On the view screen, she could see Valerian transport ships beginning to break orbit, using the distraction the Defiant Hope provided to escape with their precious cargo of civilians. Warhead calibrated, Elise announced. Loading into missile tube 3. Marcus, I need a firing solution, Sarah commanded. We get exactly one shot at this. Her first officer worked the calculations, factoring in the dreadnought's movement, their own evasive maneuvers, and the microsecond timing required to slip through the shield gap. Solution plotted. We need to be within 5,000 kilometers for the accuracy we need. Then take us in, Sarah ordered. The helmsman complied, and the Defiant Hope dove toward the massive Kreth warship like a minnow attacking a whale. The dreadnought's weapons fire intensified, and Sarah felt the ship shudder under repeated impacts. More alarms screamed warnings. Somewhere below decks, she heard the muffled explosion of a secondary system overloading. 4,000 kilometers, Marcus counted down. 3,000. 2,000. Missile ready, Elise confirmed. 1,000 kilometers. Commander, we're in optimal range. Sarah took a breath, her entire world narrowing to this single moment. 40,000 lives hung in the balance. Her crew trusted her. Elise was looking at her with those green eyes full of hope and trust. This was what she had trained for, what she had dreamed of since she was a child watching the stars from Earth. This was humanity's moment to prove they belonged among the stars. Fire, she commanded. The missile streaked away from the Defiant Hope like a silver needle threading through the fabric of space itself. Sarah watched the tactical display with her heart hammering against her ribs, tracking the projectile's path as it raced toward the massive Kreth dreadnought. Every person on the bridge held their breath, eyes fixed on the screen showing the weapon's trajectory. The unyielding Sovereign continued its relentless barrage against both the planet below and the tiny human ship that dared to challenge it, apparently unconcerned with the single missile approaching from an inferior opponent. The Kreth weapon batteries fired another volley, 6 massive particle beams lancing out in perfect synchronization, and in that microsecond gap as their shields recalibrated to allow the energy discharge, Sarah's missile slipped through. The warhead penetrated the dreadnought's defensive barrier like a ghost passing through a wall, and for a moment, Sarah thought perhaps the Kreth hadn't even noticed. Then Elise's carefully calibrated phased plasma charge detonated deep against the enemy hull, and the tactical sensors showed exactly what they had hoped for. The explosion itself was relatively minor, barely scoring the dreadnought's thick armor plating, but the resonance frequency Elise had programmed into the warhead propagated through the whole material like a tuning fork struck at the perfect pitch. The vibrations reached the Sovereign's massive antimatter reactor, and the containment fields that held the churning power core in check suddenly found themselves fighting harmonics they were never designed to counter. Warning klaxons began blaring aboard the Kreth vessel as their reactors started to destabilize. Sarah could see it happening on her sensors, the energy readings fluctuating wildly as the dreadnought's safety systems recognized the catastrophic threat. The Kreth had built redundancy upon redundancy into their flagship, and those automatic protocols did exactly what they were supposed to do. They executed an emergency reactor shutdown before the containment failure could vaporize the entire ship. The unyielding Sovereign's weapons fell silent mid-volley. Its shields flickered and died. The massive vessel's engines went dark, and 3 kilometers of the most feared warship in the sector became a drifting piece of inert metal, helpless and blind. The bridge of the Defiant Hope erupted in shocked celebration. David Park let out a whoop of victory. Yuki was laughing with disbelief. Even Marcus allowed himself a rare smile, shaking his head in amazement. Sarah felt a wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy, but she forced herself to stay focused. They had bought time, nothing more. Broadcast on all Valerian frequencies, Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the celebration. Tell every transport ship, every evacuation vessel, every civilian craft capable of breaking orbit that they have 30 minutes to get as many people off that planet as possible. Coordinate with their emergency services. Yuki, I want you personally managing that evacuation. Save as many as we can. Yes, Commander, Yuki replied, her fingers already flying across her communications console. Within seconds, she was speaking in flawless Valerian, the musical tones of the translator giving instructions to the desperate survivors below. Marcus stepped closer to Sarah's chair, lowering his voice. The Kreth will get that reactor back online eventually. When they do, we'll deal with it, Sarah interrupted. But right now, we focus on the Valorians. How many can we estimate they'll save? Elise looked up from her station, where she had been monitoring the dreadnought's status. Based on the number of transport vessels responding and their cargo capacity, if they use every available minute, maybe 20,000. Half the population. 20,000 lives. It wasn't everyone, but it was 20,000 people who would have been dead if the Defiant Hope hadn't intervened. Sarah felt the weight of those who wouldn't make it, the 20,000 who would die because 30 minutes wasn't enough time, but she pushed the grief aside. There would be time to mourn later. Right now, she needed to ensure those who could be saved actually made it to safety. Commander, I'm picking up a tight beam communication from the Sovereign, Yuki announced, surprise evident in her voice. They're hailing us directly. Audio only. Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus and Elise. The Kreth were notoriously prideful, and their military culture viewed communication with enemies as a sign of weakness unless it was to demand surrender. That war leader Thaxon was reaching out to them was unprecedented. Put it through, Sarah ordered. The voice that came through the speakers was deep and resonant, translated from the Kreth's native language into English by the communication systems. It carried an edge of cold fury barely held in check. Human vessel. I am War Leader Thaxon, commander of the unyielding sovereign and bearer of the Kreth Dominion's authority in this sector. You have committed an act of war against my ship. Sarah stood from her chair, as if Thaxon could see her through the audio-only channel. This is Commander Sarachin of the United Earth vessel Defiant Hope. You were murdering innocent civilians. We stopped you. If you consider that an act of war, then I suppose we're at war. There was a pause, and Sarah could almost feel Thaxon's rage radiating through the connection. When he spoke again, his words were measured and deliberate. In 12 years of service, the unyielding sovereign has never been damaged. We have crushed entire fleets, brought civilizations to their knees, and enforced the dominions will across 17 systems. No enemy has ever touched us. And you, a species barely capable of faster-than-light travel, in a ship that my sensors classify as little more than scrap metal with engines, you disabled my vessel with a single missile. That's correct, Sarah confirmed, keeping her voice level. And if you threaten those Valerian evacuation ships, I'll do it again. We might not survive your next attack, but I guarantee you won't survive ours either. We've already proven we can hit you when it counts. Another pause, longer this time. Sarah could hear what sounded like harsh Kreth voices in the background of the transmission, possibly Thaxon's bridge crew. When the war leader spoke again, there was something different in his tone, not quite respect, but perhaps a grudging acknowledgement. You are either supremely brave or supremely foolish, human. Possibly both. Explain to me how your primitive vessel accomplished what no other species has managed. Sarah smiled, though Thaxon couldn't see it. We're humans. We spent thousands of years fighting each other before we reached the stars. We learned to win battles we should have lost, to find advantages where none existed, and to never, ever give up when lives are on the line. You relied on overwhelming force. We relied on creativity, precision, and the willingness to take risks that more cautious species wouldn't consider. Interesting, Thaxon replied. My tactical officer informs me that your missile penetrated our shields during a weapons discharge cycle. The timing required would be beyond the capabilities of most species' automated systems. I assume you employed some form of advanced artificial intelligence? No AI, Sarah said, feeling a surge of pride. That shot was plotted by my first officer using manual calculations, and the warhead was hand-calibrated by our science officer. Human ingenuity, war leader. It's kind of our specialty. The silence that followed lasted nearly 10 seconds. Sarah could imagine Thaxton processing this information, trying to reconcile it with his understanding of humanity's supposed primitive status in the galactic community. "You have 23 minutes remaining before my engineers restore primary power," Thaxton finally said. "I advise you to use that time to flee to maximum faster-than-light speed, because when my weapons come back online, I will reduce your ship to its component atoms. The Valorians will die regardless. You have merely prolonged their suffering." "We're not leaving," Sarah stated firmly. "And if you resume your attack on those civilians, every species in the galaxy will know that the mighty unyielding sovereign was disabled by a single human ship with inferior technology. How do you think that will affect the Kreth Dominion's reputation? How many of those 17 subjugated systems will start wondering if they need to be quite so afraid of you anymore?" She could hear sharp intakes of breath from her crew. Threatening a Kreth war leader's honor was dangerous, potentially suicidal. But Sarah was betting that Thaxton was intelligent enough to see the truth in her words. The Kreth Dominion's power was built as much on fear as on actual military might. If word spread that humans, barely spacefaring humans, had humiliated their flagship, it could undermine decades of carefully cultivated terror. Thaxton's response came through gritted teeth, the translator barely able to convey the controlled rage in his voice. "You would use information warfare against us. How very human." "Very well, Commander Chen. I will allow the Valerian evacuation to proceed unhindered. But understand this, you have made an enemy today. The Kreth Dominion will remember this insult, and we will remember you personally." "I can live with that," Sarah replied. "As long as the Valorians live too." The communication channel closed with an abrupt click. The bridge remained silent for a moment before Marcus let out a long breath. "Commander, I think you may have just started an interstellar incident." "Probably," Sarah admitted, sinking back into her chair. "But we saved lives. That's what matters." Elise approached Sarah's chair, her expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "That was incredibly risky. If Thaxton decides that honor requires revenge, then we'll deal with it when it comes," Sarah interrupted gently. "For now, let's focus on coordinating that evacuation. I want every Valerian who wants to leave to have that chance." The next 20 minutes were a controlled frenzy of activity. Yuki coordinated with Valerian emergency services, directing transport ships to population centers that could be reached quickly. The Defiant Hope maintained a protective position between the disabled dreadnought and the planet, ready to intercept if the Kreth attempted to fire on the fleeing civilians despite Thaxton's word. Sarah watched the evacuation proceed on her tactical display, seeing dozens of ships rise from Theta 7's surface, each one carrying hundreds or thousands of refugees to safety. David provided regular updates on the Sovereign's status. Reactor restart sequence initiated at 18 minutes. "They're good, I'll give them that. Most ships would need twice that long to safely bring a reactor back online after a forced shutdown." "Keep monitoring," Sarah ordered. "If they show any signs of targeting those transports, I want to know immediately." Elise had returned to her science station but kept glancing over at Sarah with an expression that made Sarah's heart race despite the tension of their situation. There was something in those green eyes, pride, affection, maybe even love, that spoke volumes about feelings that had remained unspoken for too long. At the 25-minute mark, the last of the Valerian transport ships broke orbit. Yuki reported that they had successfully evacuated 22,000 civilians, slightly better than their initial estimate. It was a bittersweet victory, knowing that 18,000 Valorians had perished on the planet below, but Sarah reminded herself that without their intervention, all 40,000 would have died. Every life saved mattered. "The Sovereign is powering up," David announced. "Reactor at 30% and climbing. Shields starting to generate. Weapon systems coming online. Time to leave," Marcus stated firmly. "We've done what we came to do. No sense dying now." Sarah nodded. "Helm, plot a jump course to the nearest Earth station. Maximum speed. Let's put some distance between us and—" "Commander, I'm receiving another transmission from the Sovereign," Yuki interrupted. War Leader Thaxon again. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Put him through. Thaxon's voice came through the speakers once more, but this time the fury had been replaced by something else, something that almost sounded like curiosity. Commander Chen. My weapons are now functional, and I could easily destroy you before you complete your faster-than-light calculations. But I find myself reluctant to do so. Sarah raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Your species is unlike any I have encountered, Thaxon continued. Most civilizations reach for the stars when their technology surpasses certain thresholds. They build upon centuries of scientific advancement until space travel becomes almost trivial. But humans, you forced your way into space with barely adequate technology, driven by curiosity and determination rather than capability. You join the galactic community with ships that more advanced species would consider museum pieces, yet you compete anyway. And today, you challenge the most powerful warship in the sector to defend aliens you have known for barely a decade, despite having no logical chance of success. That's accurate, Sarah confirmed, unsure where this was going. The Kreth value strength, but we also value worthy adversaries, Thaxon said. You have proven yourself worthy, Commander Chen. I declare this engagement concluded with mutual honor. You may depart without fear of pursuit. But be warned, the next time we meet, we will be prepared for your unconventional tactics. The advantage of surprise will not serve you twice. Sarah felt a smile tugging at her lips. Understood, War Leader. And thank you for honoring your word regarding the evacuation. A Kreth does not lie, Thaxon replied, a hint of pride in his voice. We may be conquerors, but we are not without principles. Safe travels, human. I suspect we will encounter each other again. I find myself looking forward to it. The transmission ended, and this time the silence on the bridge lasted several seconds before erupting into relieved laughter and celebration. They had done it. They had faced the most feared warship in the sector, disabled it, saved 22,000 lives, and earned the respect of a Kreth war leader. It seemed almost impossible, but the evidence was right there on their sensors, the unyielding sovereign holding position, making no move to pursue as the defiant Hope prepared to jump away. Execute jump sequence, Sarah ordered, and her helmsman complied with evident relief. The stars stretched into rainbow streams as the ship transitioned to faster-than-light travel, leaving Theta 7 and its bittersweet victory behind them. Once they were safely away, Sarah stood from her command chair and addressed her crew. I want damage reports from all departments within the hour. Excellent work, everyone. You just proved that humans belong among the stars, and you saved thousands of lives doing it. Be proud of what we accomplished today. The crew responded with tired but genuine smiles, and Sarah excused herself from the bridge, leaving Marcus in command. She needed a moment to process everything that had happened, to come down from the adrenaline high of combat and deal with the emotional aftermath. She made her way to the observation deck, a small room with a transparent canopy that showed the strange, distorted view of faster-than-light travel. Sarah had been there for perhaps 5 minutes, watching the colors swirl past, when she heard the door open behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Elise. She had become attuned to the scientist's presence over their years serving together. That was the most terrifying and exhilarating experience of my life, Elise said quietly, coming to stand beside Sarah at the window. When you ordered us into combat against that dreadnought, I thought we were all going to die. So did I, for a moment, Sarah admitted. But I couldn't let those Valorians be slaughtered without at least trying to help. I know, Elise replied. It's one of the things she paused, seeming to gather her courage. It's one of the things I love about you. Your unwillingness to abandon people who need help, even when it puts you at risk. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She turned to face Elise, finding those green eyes watching her with open affection and vulnerability. Elise. I almost told you before we jumped the Theta 7, Elise continued, words tumbling out now that she had started. I thought we were going to die, and I couldn't bear the idea of never telling you how I feel. I've been in love with you for over a year, Sarah. Every time we share the observation deck, every conversation we have, Every time you make some impossible decision and somehow make it work, I fall a little more in love with you. And I know fraternization regulations technically prohibit relationships between command officers and civilian specialists, but I don't care anymore. Life is too short and the universe is too dangerous to waste time pretending I don't feel this way. Sarah felt warmth spreading through her chest, a joy that somehow exceeded even the victory they had just achieved. Elise, she took a breath, letting herself be vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed. I've been in love with you since our first mission together, when you figured out how to recalibrate our failing shields using nothing but a data pad and pure stubbornness. I've wanted to tell you 1,000 times, but I was afraid of complicating our working relationship, of potentially making things awkward for the crew. Elise laughed, a sound like music. So we've both been idiots? Apparently, Sarah agreed, smiling. But we don't have to keep being idiots. She reached out, cupping Elise's face gently with one hand. Elise leaned into the touch, her own hand coming up to rest on Sarah's wrist. For a moment, they just stood there, drinking in each other's presence, and then Sarah closed the distance between them and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them savoring the moment they had waited so long to experience. Then Elise's arms wrapped around Sarah's neck, and Sarah pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of months of longing finally finding release. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Elise was smiling with such radiant happiness that Sarah felt her heart might burst. So what now? Elise asked, her forehead resting against Sarah's. Now we figure this out together, Sarah replied. The regulations are flexible enough if we're careful and professional. And after today, after what we accomplished, I think we've earned the right to pursue some happiness. They stood together in the observation deck for a long time, watching the colors of faster-than-light travel swirl around them, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for a future that suddenly seemed brighter than it had any right to be. 3 days later, when the Defiant Hope finally reached Earth Station Delta, they found themselves at the center of an interstellar sensation. News of their confrontation with the unyielding Sovereign had spread across the galactic communication networks like wildfire. The Valorians had broadcast their gratitude to every species who would listen, telling the story of how a single human ship had stood against the Kreth Dominion's most powerful weapon to save 22,000 lives. Sarah was summoned to a virtual conference with the United Earth Defense Command, where admirals and politicians demanded detailed reports of the engagement. She explained their tactics, the phased plasma warhead, the precision timing required to penetrate the dreadnought's shields. The military officers listened with intense interest, already thinking about how to incorporate these strategies into Earth's defensive doctrine. The politicians saw the propaganda value, the way this story elevated humanity's status in the galactic community. But what surprised Sarah most came 3 weeks after the incident. A formal communication arrived from the Galactic Council, requesting humanity's participation in a new initiative to protect civilian populations from aggressive expansionist powers. Apparently, their willingness to stand up to the Kreth, and their success in doing so, had impressed species who had felt powerless against military threats for generations. Even more surprising was a private message that arrived for Sarah personally. It was from War Leader Thaxon himself, sent through encrypted channels. The message was brief and characteristically Kreth in its formality. Commander Chen, I have reported the events at Theta 7 to the Kreth High Command. They are displeased with the outcome but impressed by your tactical acumen. I argued that humanity represents a new paradigm in galactic affairs, a species that compensates for technological limitations with innovation and courage. The High Command has agreed to reassess our policies toward human-controlled space. Consider this a gesture of respect from one warrior to another. Our next encounter will be as friends rather than enemies, unless circumstances dictate otherwise. War Leader Thaxon. Sarah showed the message to Elise, who read it with wide eyes. You've made an impression, Elise said, smiling. The Kreth don't acknowledge equals lightly. We made an impression, Sarah corrected, taking Elise's hand. None of this would have been possible without your calibration of that warhead, without our crew's precision, without humanity's stubborn refusal to accept that we're outmatched. Elise squeezed her hand, their relationship now an open secret aboard the Defiant Hope, accepted by a crew who had watched them dance around each other for over a year. So what's next for us? More impossible battles against superior opponents? Sarah laughed, pulling Elise close. Probably. That seems to be Earth's specialty now. But whatever comes next, we'll face it together. She looked out the viewport at the stars, at the vast galaxy humanity had joined barely 15 years ago. Out there were species more advanced, more powerful, with technology that seemed like magic. But humanity had proven something important at Theta 7. They had proven that advancement wasn't just about superior weapons or shields. It was about courage, creativity, and the willingness to stand up for others even when the odds seemed impossible. The universe was dangerous and filled with threats. But it was also full of possibilities, of allies worth defending, and of challenges waiting to be overcome. And if facing those challenges meant Sarah could stand beside Elise, could lead a crew of brave humans into the unknown, could make a difference in the lives of species she had barely known existed a few years ago, well, that seemed like a future worth fighting for. The Defiant Hope might have been a retrofitted cargo hauler crewed by a species barely capable of interstellar travel. But it was their ship, crewed by humans who refused to accept that being outgunned meant being defeated. And as Sarah stood in the observation deck with Elise's hand in hers, watching the stars shine with infinite promise, she knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. Humanity had arrived among the stars, and the galaxy would never be quite the same. The end.